Welcome to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts panel. We are joined today by Rachel Fleit, director of the documentary Introducing Selma Blair for Discovery. And wow, Rachel, this is a gut punch of a project. It's very raw, it's very real. The film follows actress model Selma Blair, we all know her. It's her emotional quest to treat her multiple sclerosis. Ultimately, why did she agree to have a camera be in her face for all of these hours and days and months?
So Selma was diagnosed in 2018, and we met 9 months after her diagnosis. She was sort of resistant to the MS drugs, and it seemed as though the stem cell transplant that had been presented to her was going to be her only option to try to slow the progression of the MS flare that she was in. And she knew on some level that what she was going through was extraordinary, and she wanted to tell her story. We were introduced to each other by a photographer who she had just worked with, Casper, who's our executive producer. And we started talking, and there was an immediate bond between Selma and I. And I think she felt that I could tell her story, and she felt like, we've talked about this a lot. She was in an extremely vulnerable position. She was in a state of surrender. And she was like, I think that this might help people. There was an outpouring on social media when she came out with her diagnosis. And she saw very quickly that people were being helped by her honesty. So I think that was her inspiration. Then from there, she really became the subject. I mean, she gave her life to me. Nothing was off limits. She didn't step foot in the edit, which was extraordinary. We did finally show her a picture locked version of the film, and she had one note, which was that we had incorrectly used a photo of her mother. We actually put a photo of her aunt in by accident. So she's like, you might want to change that. But she's very much the subject of this documentary, which is very, very exciting for me.
And the way the film opens, we see Selma acting completely normal and natural and funny, but the moment the dog jumps off of her lap, that's when she starts stuttering, she starts losing focus. And it's a very revealing scene where we see just how sporadic MS can be, patient to patient. Can you talk about why you chose that moment to open the documentary?
It was so clear. A documentary is very much a collaboration between a director and an editor. And I knew that day, it was the greatest day of filmmaking in my life. We really went, we really went for it that day. And after Selma had jumped into the pool in her nightgown and revealed sort of the story in which she stopped drinking, I said, well, I'd really like to interview you, do sort of a master interview. It was going to be our first seated interview of the film that we've done together, because I was very, very committed to a verite style documentary from the start with her. But I knew that I would need these touch points in order to tell the story I wanted to tell with her. And she decided to get dressed up for her interview. And obviously we kept the cameras rolling. But I think in deciding that was the opening, it was the moment where she was, she'd put on the facade, right? Like we all in this day and age, this Instagram filter world that we live in, she'd put on her face, ultimately, her costume. She sat in her chair and, she's powerless over her MS. And it was so quickly apparent in that moment. She'd given me such a poised interview, but the MS took over. And to me, I feel like that set the tone for the film. It was like, we're going to try to present ourselves to the world, but then these things are going to happen that we're completely powerless over. And I think that everyone identifies with that in some way, whether you have a chronic illness or you don't, or you have a disability or you're able-bodied. We all have these moments where we're trying to be a certain way to the world, but we can't. There's and she handles that with such dignity and grace throughout the film, which I think is why she's so remarkable.
Mm-hmm. The documentary is a perfect mix of entertainment and education. Like so much detail goes into describing the disease as well as the stem cell treatments. And was that one of your main goals, to educate the public about something they may not know much about? MS doesn't seem to get a lot of headlines in the media.
I knew we had an opportunity to teach people, but I like to make movies you can really feel, in your body. And, but I knew that we had to educate our audience, and we had an opportunity to educate our audience about sort of the mystery of autoimmune disease. And so in order to fully understand what Selma was going through, I felt like we had to really understand the science, but by no means did I want to make a science film. I really wanted to make a movie about how this woman was making her way through the world and in her life in this moment. But there was a key component, you had to understand what MS was. You had to understand that her immune system was attacking her brain and her spinal cord. I mean, and the symptoms are different for everyone. Like, we just don't know. I actually have an autoimmune condition. I wouldn't call it a disease, but I have no hair, and my immune system attacks my hair follicles. Like, it makes no sense, but the result is that I'm bald, and no one really knows why. And people like to say, oh, it's because of this, that, and the other thing. But I think that MS is almost a metaphor in some ways in the film, but it also allows so many people with chronic illness to feel seen. So there was a lot to explaining it that was going to be beneficial for the overall result, I think.
Mm. And, watching the movie, it almost feels like MS is this Darth Vader type villain, and Selma is the hero who's trying to conquer the bad guy. And it seems like she pulls through in the end. Can you give us any updates on what's going on with her condition today?
Well, so it's interesting you use that metaphor. I was just thinking as you said that like the villain never goes away. You just have to learn how to live with the villain. I think that's true for all of us, right? We all have our demons that like rear their ugly heads every once in a while. So I think she's living with the villain. She has good days and she has bad days. If she was here, she would tell you that she is in remission. There's no new lesions on her brain. But she still experiences the symptoms of MS. And I think that that's something really that we learn in the movie. It's like, I think the film ultimately is about the human spirit. And we have to learn to live with what we've got, right?
I'd love to talk about the title, introducing Selma Blair. Selma has been in the spotlight for years in films like Cruel Intentions and Hellboy, but in a way, it almost feels like this film is a reintroduction to Selma. What's your specific meaning for using that word introducing in the title?
Well, first of all, we all have the versions of ourselves that we've presented to the world, right? And with Selma, I felt like something we talked about all the time. In the movie, she says, I always was a supporting actress. And she also says that she didn't try very hard to be the best actress she could be. Mm. And the subtitle for the film is The Role of a Lifetime. And we talked a lot during the film about like her starring role had finally appeared and all she had to do was be herself. And I think that that's like something that, we promote, authenticity and honesty in telling her story. So to me, it's like really introducing like Selma Blair in all of her fullness, in all of her rawness and her realness and all of her humanness, the mess, the glory, the beauty, all of it, and incredible sense of humor. I feel like people didn't know sometimes how funny she was. I mean, she played great comedic roles, but this really lets her comedy shine.
I think the most emotional moments, at least for me, were the ones between Selma and her son. The way she let him cut her hair before she went to the hospital so that when she returned, he would be prepared to see his mother in a new sort of light. Can you talk about their relationship at all? Because they really steal the movie, this bond between mother and son.
I just like I don't know, the whole Selma and Arthur's relationship is encapsulated, I think, in that dodgeball scene. They're just a lot of fun. I mean, he loves her and she loves him. And, she's mom, she's also a playmate, and they have a lot of fun together. And I think the greatest part about Arthur is like he was kind of like seemingly unfazed by her condition. It just was like, well, this is my mom, and this is the way she walks, and this is the way she talks, which is a direct quote from one of our producers, Troy Nankin. But it's like kids, see what they see, but also I think that Arthur just was able to roll with it. And we filmed, nothing was off limits in the film, but there were these certain moments where, like, Selma had Arthur coming back and forth to Chicago while she was getting treatment to have visits. The last time she went in for the actual stem cell, we decided not to have the crew there. We just filmed that on an iPhone because I wanted to give that space to them, that like sacred space, just in case something did happen. I didn't want Arthur's last moment of seeing his mom to be with like a whole crew there, which our crew was very small, but nonetheless, we were sensitive to that. So he's a really cool kid. He's a lot like his mom. He has extraordinary comedic timing, and they're just like the best duo. I'm glad it comes across in the film.
Mm-hmm. And a final question today, what is Selma's reaction to seeing the movie, or has she seen the whole thing front to back?
Yeah, we sat next to each other during the Los Angeles premiere, or in the same row. There were a couple of people between us. And it was the first time we were watching the film with an audience. And I think she feels very proud of it, I know she does. She's told me that on numerous occasions. And because she wasn't in the edit, because she was very much the subject of the film, she trusted me with telling my version of her story, and so I think there's always an adjustment in that moment, but I think she feels like she is seen. I think that's something we all really want, right? Is to feel seen. And I think she feels very seen in the film. I think she's in the grieving the loss of her mom. So a lot of that I think is quite difficult to just be reminded of how her mom passed, and during COVID, which was such a strange time to lose a loved one. So I think the film is definitely a love letter to her mother, and it's my love letter to Selma. So that's just, I think, the most challenging part for her that I've witnessed, is just like really getting to grapple with the loss of her mom.
Well, thank you for speaking with us today, Rachel. We'll see you in a little bit at the group panel.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marcus.
Welcome to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts panel. We are joined today by Andrea Nix Fine and Sean Fine, the writers, directors, producers of LFG on HBO Max. And this documentary, it chronicles the U.S. women's soccer team's quest for equal pay, and they take legal action against the U.S. Soccer Federation. I'm sure everyone in America and the world is aware of the story. I'm curious, what brought you guys into the project? The lawsuit was first filed in 2019. When did you come into the proceedings?
Oh, you want to go?
No, you're good.
Sorry. Right as the lawsuit was filed, a friend of ours and our co-producer came to us and said, "Hey guys, this just happened. What do you think? Do you think this is interesting? Do you think it'd make a compelling story?" And so we immediately do what we always do. We just started researching and digging in and looking into, what's behind this lawsuit. And as we started looking into it, there's decades behind this lawsuit. There's a lot of history. We're also looking at, like, why are they suing their federation when they're so successful? Why is this the last straw? And it's pretty compelling when you find out what they're doing. And what we unveiled was this was a huge David and Goliath story that, while it plays out in the press, kind of the underlying aspects of it aren't really understood. The emotional toll it takes on the players, really the reason they're doing it. And also the facts themselves are quite disputed in the public and falsely disputed. So we felt compelled to tell this story, one, very truthfully, and two, from their point of view, from their perspective, meaning the players, and show really what they're going through.
And Andrea, I'll come to you for this one. I kind of want to start with the judge's ruling where he ruled against the players, and watching all of the reactions from the players, I just felt my heart being ripped out again and again each time we went to another person. What were your reactions behind the scenes when the judge's ruling came down?
It was shock. I mean, I think we were just as shocked as they were. It wasn't like we had some special pulse into knowing more information than they did. I think their law team was shocked. And I think that's where it just hits that gut punch. And at that time, we were already in COVID, and we had already sent them little camera packages to sort of keep filming, but we never actually expected that we would be needing to record anything to do with a summary judgment, which is the judge's sort of take on the whole thing, saying, look, in the end of the day, does this move to trial or not? Is there enough merit in the case that it deserves a trial? And he ruled against them. And it was the last thing we ever expected. And I think it's one of the most emotional parts of the film. And I think for the first time, these women are so strong and they don't like vulnerability. That's kind of strength and power is their MO to get their work done collectively. And it is, I still well up sometimes when I see that, because you feel for them, because you never see these women get like their face break down and share with each other and kind of just sit with this information all together. And it was one of our favorite parts of the film. I think, that was the silver lining in some ways about needing to send people camera packages to finish your movie. But yeah, I'm forever indebted that they trusted enough to hit record. And when they did that and we were able to upload that, it was something quite special. And we had to be sensitive to the legal proceedings of the information. So you actually can't hear them, but you watch their face even more so because of that. And you're sort of watching this play out over their expressions. And it was very moving for us to start to see those come in.
And so much of the movie, it goes into their private lives, these soccer superstars, the Megan Rapinoe and Jessica McDonald. And was one of your goals to kind of bring us in so that we see them as just a normal everyday person? And how open were they to have cameras in their homes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of like that's what we love about documentary filmmaking, is we like to get close to people. We like to connect with people. We like our cameras to connect with them. And I think for this, you had to understand how they live, how they normally live. You have to understand like what they do on a daily basis in terms of their soccer career and being a professional athlete, and then also what they're doing with the lawsuit. So you have people like Megan, who are super famous, who, she opened herself up. She was the first player that signed on. We talked to her literally right after she got off the plane from France to New York, right before the ticker tape parade. She met us, we talked to her, she's like, I'm all in. And then you have people like Jessica McDonald, who, this was her first time ever on the US team and winning a World Cup. And she had worked her whole life her whole career to get to that point, to be on the US team. And she's the only mom at that time on the team, a single mom. And, she really opened up her whole life too, and was pretty vulnerable, opening up her life. And she lived with a host family at the time. And you get in the film that she lives and shares a house with another family, because she can't really afford her own house at the time. So, which is kind of crazy when you step back and think about it, which is why we filmed her as well. But yeah, they all, I think it's interesting, I don't think we love getting as close as we can. And I'm the DP on our project, so I filmed really close. And it wasn't until Megan saw the film that she said to Andrea and I, like, I understand now why you were so close to me. Like, sometimes during that filming, I wasn't always loving the camera was so close, but she said, you actually see what I'm going through just on my face, the expression, without me telling you. I'm watching how upset I am, or how hard this is, or how tired I am. It's little things in the film that you might not realize, but Megan yawns a lot throughout the film, and because she's exhausted. This is a full-time job on top of a full-time job. The lawsuit is full-time on top of being the best soccer player in the world. That's incredible that they're able to do this. And then on top of it, yeah, let's bring you can come film this as well. So there's a third part of their thing. So it's
And I think it also just lends itself to people are complex, right? And so you want to be people, while you might know someone like Megan Rapinoe and you think you might, that was actually one of the things, comments we get back along the way was like, wow, you know, whether they loved her or hated her before, they saw her differently after. And that she's a lot more relatable, I think, and has, like, when she talks about her family and her brother's addiction and just kind of where she's from, and that she's evolved to be the person she is that people see, but there's all these layers behind her. And that was really important for us to be able to, like, make sure that people presenting these women as whole individuals. And same thing with Jessica, or even like Becky Sauerbrunn and Kelly and Sam Yu, as you start to meet them and see how they all kind of collectively depend on each other's superpowers, but there are such distinct individuals that care deeply about this, but they kind of come to it from different places. And I think that's one of the best things you can do in any documentary film, is make sure people are coming across with complexity.
And also we talked about it before we started, because this isn't a sports film. Yes, they're the US women's soccer team, but this is a fight for equal pay. And they're famous and they play soccer, but their fight, you know, reverberates throughout the workforce with many different people. And so for us to be able to have viewers connect with them as individuals and people was almost more important than showing them as great soccer players, because we kind of all know that already.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I'm not really a huge soccer fan, but I knew their faces from the media, and it was so just eye-opening to see their personal lives. And somebody mentioned that she only makes like $15,000 per game or something. And that completely blew my mind, because you have this misconception that sports stars are millionaires. You know, every one of them just makes $1 million. And, you know, you couldn't really do this documentary without mentioning the political comments, you know, from Donald Trump, his tweets, and Joe Biden, his words of encouragement. Have you noticed over the past few years, either the political landscape or public sentiment changing one way or another toward or against the equal pay debate?
I think people have gotten pretty comfortable spewing some hate and being pretty ugly. And I think while I felt like I shouldn't have been shocked, but when these women start to come out and state their case, and, you know, on social media presence, or things are picked up on YouTube, it was really shocking to see some of the results that people felt pretty comfortable sharing, that are so misogynistic, that are so homophobic, and like scraping at, like, calling people inhuman, and just baseless, awful stuff. And I think that is something that I feel like is mirrored throughout the political system right now anyway. Like right now we're making a film on January 6th, and it's pretty amazing to be able to look at what people are feeling more and more comfortable just putting out there. So I think that in that way, I saw that in the women's lives, like, kind of rear its head, because everything feels political. But
you also realize when people poke at something that is a bother in society, and when they're touching that nerve, you know, people are gonna be vocal back at them. So in a way, like even in the Olympics, you know, Trump mentioned, even after the presidency, in the Olympics, he started going after the US women's soccer team again, when they lost, even before they lost. Oh, you're so woke and this is your problem. So they're poking at something. He's the head of misogyny. So they're like poking at him, obviously, and hitting a nerve. So it's horrible, but I guess that's what happens when you're trying to make change and when you're trying to do good in the world. So.
And final question, guys, is there going to be an LFG 2? I mean, the story's not over yet. It continues. Are we going to see more from you?
It's not over. We'll see. We talk to them all the time about what's going on. And they're, you know, we'll see. It's not ruled out, and we hope it's a happy ending, 100% happy ending. It should be,
because, you know, this could go on for, you know, 2 weeks or 2 years, the appeal process, you know, because the US Soccer Federation and the players could settle at any time, so it's really in their hands, and it's kind of, they're the only folks that can play for one another, right? So it's sort of like a really bad family dispute that somehow has to come to the end of it. And I actually truly hope that US Soccer steps up and starts to self-reflect a little bit and figures out, well, where do we go from here? Because we can't keep having our players sue us. right? There can't
Mm,
keep having
yeah.
such an ugly fight in this house. So they, you know, they have to look inside it, and I think they could be a beacon for other folks who need to struggle to address the same thing, right?
But
So
US soccer has a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Yeah.
even with trying to make our film, even trying to get them to be interviewed in the film and be in the film and know about the film was just a huge struggle from them. They kind of control everything. And they declined to be in the film. So that's unfortunate. But hopefully they turn around, but I think it's like turning a giant aircraft carrier. It's going to take some time, but hopefully the women can force that turn.
Well, thank you guys for chatting with us today. We'll see you in a little bit for our panel discussion.
Thank you.
thank you.
Welcome to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts panel. We are joined today by Robert Greene, the director and editor of Procession on Netflix. And this documentary, it tells the story of 6 men who were abused by the Catholic priests when they were children. And Robert, you find a truly original way of dealing with their grief and their suffering, and that is to just kind of recreate their nightmares and their memories using actors and scripts and Hollywood magic. How did this idea come about? I've never seen anything like this before.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's nice to be with you today. This comes from a long sort of career of working in this way. This is my 7th documentary, feature documentary, and we, the last several films have tried to use recreations or stage scenes, is what we kind of refer to them as mostly, as a way to kind of get to some other deeper truths, right? So in this case, this comes off of a film I made a couple years ago that played at Sundance called Bisbee 17, where we brought together a bunch of people to stage this historically traumatic event, and we saw firsthand how cathartic and powerful that was. And really, it was just sort of this feeling of like, you know, first of all, what's the point of making a documentary to me anymore? Why am I making this work if I'm not going to be trying to help the people that actually agree to participate in the film? And then for the recreations, it really comes down to this: giving power back to survivors is something that so few people can do. And actually making a movie is one way to do that. Making a movie together, these scenes are all part of this broader thing. And even the documentary that you experience that are the more traditional documentary parts of the film, those are also making a movie together. And you know, having done this work for a really long time with my producers and the team that we've assembled, I just know that making a movie can be fun, and it can be empowering, and it can do all these things if you want it to.
Mm. And at one point, one of the men calls this technique, I think he says, an unusual approach to therapy. Yeah. And that made me really think, and is this something that if it works so well for them, I'm assuming it worked for them, is this going to be a new therapy method that is used for all kinds of people?
Well, the film is really influenced by drama therapy, and drama therapy is the intentional use of theater and role play and other sort of art practice for a therapeutic goal, right? So that's what drama therapy is. We're not doing drama therapy in the film, but it's definitely influenced by that way of thinking, right? So taking on roles and staging things, and in some ways building up sets and literally tearing them down of the worst. The set is the set of one of the worst days of your life, with the ability to also tear that set down. That's a sort of theatrical method of therapeutic work that has been sort of practiced in this other space. For us, here's the thing, I don't know whether everybody needs to go out and make a movie about their traumas. I think the truth is that these guys are exceptional. They were cast by the lawyer that has represented all of them, Rebecca Randalls. You see her in the film. She was the one who cast this film because she knew them. She knew that they could handle it. She knew that they could get something out of it. And it's a special group in a sense, because they are, they're all looking to help. Most importantly, they want to help themselves, they want to help each other, and they want to help the viewers that are watching the film, right? So this is a special group. But I will say that it's not revolutionary to think that getting in the room together can be helpful. You know, this is what AA is based on. This is what other kind of group therapy sessions are based on. That's what we really found, was that when you're abused in this way, you are silenced and shamed because it's happened to you when you were a kid. You can't make sense of it. You'll never make sense of it. It's impossible to make sense of that kind of abuse. But, you know, feeling like you can get past the shame by being in the same space with other survivors in that way, that was the first step. And we just built off of that camaraderie that was built in the moment, with the drama therapist being a big part of the process, with Rebecca and Sasha, who's another therapist, being part of the process, just building a safe thing where we could take these risks together. And then the guys could really help each other. There are smaller versions of that could happen for anybody, I think.
There was a fear that some of the men would be re-traumatized by bringing up all of their past horrors, really. How delicate did you all have to be behind the scenes just to make sure that their well-being was the number one priority?
We talked about that from the beginning. They're, you know, I think re-traumatization is a complicated thing, I'll be honest, because the truth is we have, as filmmakers and as partners, collaborators with these guys, we have to do everything we can to make it be as safe as possible, right? So that includes having the therapist, that includes having family members. There was always family members around. We included everybody, including the skeptical family members. One of the biggest assets of the film is a skeptical wife or partner who says, you know, I need to question this, right? And that questioning, I think you see that in the film, the deliberation and the concern and all that stuff. Doubt is a huge part of what we were doing. You can't have real movement forward without real doubt about the process. But as I've sort of, you know, the other day, Michael, who's one of the 6 men in the film, he said something like, you know, about to the Kansas City Star. He said, you know, I wasn't going to be re-traumatized in this film. I'm re-traumatized by a smell or a passing image in the corner of my eye. You know, like the idea that we would be handling these guys with kid gloves is also, in a weird way, contributing to the silence. You know, it's contributing to the shame that they feel because they don't want to be handled with kid gloves. They want the chance to take power back. And re-traumatization comes from taking power back, not giving power. And as long as they were always in control, and this is something Rebecca and Sasha really hammered home to me throughout the process, as long as they're making the decisions and you're not making the decisions for them, which is a radical way to make a film, frankly, you know, but as long as they're making those choices, then you know, you're in a good place with them. And I think they did. I think they felt like they were making the choices.
We have to talk about the young actor, Tarek, who he's cast to play all of the younger versions of the men. And he really is a bright spot in the film and a breath of fresh air. And especially there's one scene where he talks to Ed and he says, "I tried my best to tell your story." And what kind of effect did all of this heavy subject matter have on Tarek? He's such a youngster.
It's another sort of thing, you know, we built so many safety checks into the process. His parents, his grandparents were there. The therapists were working very closely with Tarek the entire time. But the truth is he wasn't raised Catholic. So being in these spaces was never effective to him. The same way I wasn't raised Catholic. Being at a Catholic church means nothing to me. Like literally, like I would never feel any of that same effect that the guys were working with and working through every single day. So that was a big part of it. But we always had family around, and Tarek looked at it as a job. I mean, he literally looked at it as like, my role is to help give voice. And he's 12 years old, you know, which is a significant thing. I have a 12-year-old boy. That even though the abuse happened to younger children, we needed to make sure there was mentally, there was a kid that was a certain age, because he's heard about all this stuff. None of this surprises him. None of it shocks him. And the truth is kids, that when you give agency to kids, they will respond, most of them, especially kids as smart and, you know, talented with as much integrity as Tarek and Tarek's family, who were always just off the screen, you know? I mean, that moment where he said, I will try my best to tell your story. We didn't ask him to say that. When he's told Mike, I believe you, we didn't ask him to say that. This is an exceptionally smart kid. And it's important that the guys, it was Dan, one of the 6 men, Dan who cast him. Dan saw it. We met all these kids, and he was just absolutely focused on, in the same way Rebecca was focused on who could go through this process as the guys, he was focused on who could go through the process as a kid. And he just connected to him. And you know, Tarek has been part of all these screenings. He came to the Telluride Film Festival for the world premiere and was a part of all that. And he's been a huge part of everything.
And my final question for you is, you know, was there one scene that was more challenging or more emotional than all of the others? Did you have to just take a second and just really reflect on what was happening?
Oh my God, every step of the process was challenging and emotional, honestly. And we felt like we were on the edge of something at all times, right? And what would happen would be every single time any of us were feeling like we were slipping off the edge, which was just as much me, you know, the guys were lifting me up as much as I was lifting them up. You know, there were moments where I was the one with the most doubt, you know, and the guys would be like, no, we're here to do this. You know, they would be lifting me up, or sometimes Dan or Mike or Michael or even Ed would all sort of shut down at something sometimes. And then we would have to, one of us would step in and say, come on, like we're here together. And just that sort of camaraderie and brotherhood and brother and sisterhood really with the whole crew that we created was got us through it. I mean, I think one tough thing was when we went back to Dan's location and we did all the work to make sure that, you know, or we listened to Dan's brother who's in the film, is a guy named Tim, and he takes us back to a location where something really horrible happened to Dan. And Dan just could not accept that was the location. And that sent us on this wild goose chase, which you see the payoff for in the film. That was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear based on that. And luckily, you know, when we landed and we hit that spot, we were able to alleviate that fear a bit.
Well, thank you for chatting with us today, and we will see you a little bit later in the group panel discussion.
Thanks for your questions. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Welcome back to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts panel. We are joined today by Jimmy Chin, the director and producer of The Rescue on National Geographic. Everyone remembers the story of the 12 boys and their soccer coach who got trapped in a cave in 2018 in Thailand. But how did you originally become involved in this story?
Well, I'm a co-director on the film with my amazing wife, Chai Vassarelli. And, you know, I think that we were both riveted by the story as it was unfolding in real time. I think as parents, you know, we were very empathetic to the families involved. But, you know, the way Chai and I work, we're always thinking about, you know, these universal themes and ideas that can hopefully transcend even the subject and the events themselves, and of course the subtext of the stories. And here was a story that we really were moved by, because at the heart of the story is this idea of moral courage. And, you know, these divers who end up going in to save these kids really have everything to lose. And, you know, I think a lot of people feel like they know the story because they followed it. But in fact, I don't think people really know what happened. And essentially these kind of amateur divers from the UK and Australia are kind of the only ones that can enact this wild, kind of outrageous plan at the end. There's a ticking clock, and they are the only ones that have the skill set to do this rescue, even though there's the Thai Navy SEALs and the American Air Force PJs, all these special ops rescue teams that are there, they can't do it. And these divers have to go in, and they really have everything to lose by doing this rescue. So we were really moved by this idea of moral courage, this idea of generosity and selflessness. And it was also a story about, you know, people coming from very different backgrounds and countries and belief systems to all kind of set aside their differences to come in and try to achieve this impossible rescue. And that we felt was also timely given how divided the world is.
Mm. And the film, it blends together real life footage with dramatic reenactments, and the reenactments feature the actual divers just kind of recreating what really happened. And at times you couldn't even tell as a viewer what was a real footage and what was something that was recreated. Can you talk a bit about that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think every film has its challenges. I mean, even all the panelists today, I mean, these stories and these films always pose very unique challenges. And that's part of being a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, is taking these kind of really these constraints and these challenges and hopefully turning them into opportunities. I mean, we're all filmmakers, but really we're creative problem solvers in some way. I mean, we're storytellers too, but we had some pretty significant challenges with this film in the fact that the principal action of the rescue was, there was very, very little footage, barely anything, you know, and you know, for film, for us as filmmakers, you know, we always like to bring people into the moment, really immerse people into these stories, and you know, without any real footage inside this cave, which is pitch black, and a submerged cave, which is full of really muddy water, you know, there just wasn't anything to speak of. And this was really the first film that Chai and I have worked on where we weren't there for the principal action. So we knew that in order to bring people into this film and to give a really visceral experience, we either had to animate or shoot reenactments of the principal action. And we were very clear that we wanted to do reenactments, and you know, because authenticity and accuracy are hugely important to us, we thought, okay, well, why don't we bring the actual participants, the divers, together and have them demonstrate exactly what they did while they were in the rescue. So we were able to get them all together and brought them to a studio tank in the UK. And we had all the kind of scenes and shots that we really wanted to shoot, you know, really kind of lined out. And we would ask them to demonstrate how they, you know, did the rescue at very specific moments, you know. Jason, how many tanks were you carrying when you were going between chamber 8 and chamber 9 on day 17? And what were you doing and how were you doing it? And they literally, they brought all the same, you know, dive suits, and they had the equipment, and they were able to, you know, just do what they do. And it was a great process for us because they are, you know, very exacting individuals, as you can imagine. And so for them to get the details perfect was also really important. That authenticity element was really important. So what people are seeing on the screen is actually accurate to the moments that we're portraying. Really just to give people a sense of like how insane this rescue was and what it's like to dive with, you know, in a submerged cave 2 kilometers in with a sedated child with their hands tied behind their backs and their feet tied behind, you know, tied together, and try to enact this just incredibly daring rescue.
No, you guys did such a good job. I felt like I was there in the cave. I felt the claustrophobia and the darkness and the mud around me.
Good. Yeah,
And
that was the intention and the hope. So
a lot of attention is given to the volunteer diver who lost his life down in the caves when his oxygen ran out. How important was it to tell his story and honor his life?
you know, one thing that we really wanted to do, and this was another big challenge, was just the story is so fragmented and there were so many people there. There were thousands of people there. So there were just so many different ideas of what happened, you know, and a lot of people who were there were not aware of what other people were doing. But, you know, just as filmmakers, we wanted to make sure that we included multiple perspectives. It wasn't just the British divers and the Australian doctor that, you know, they were kind of the spearhead, but there was this huge conglomeration of different volunteers. And, you know, the Thai Navy SEALs had a very critical role in, you know, making this rescue happen. They were managing the site. They had to deal with all the logistics. And yet, even though they were the Thai Navy SEALs, they just didn't have the right skill set or even the right equipment, because all of this equipment that they need for cave diving, which is such a specific fringe kind of genre within diving, and it's by far the most risky. The special ops Thai Navy SEAL were, you know, they're trained in underwater warfare, they're trained in covert ops, but they're not trained in cave diving or cave diving rescue. So we really wanted to kind of bring them in and share their perspective. And ultimately, you know, in some ways they risked more than the British divers and the Australian divers, because they didn't have the skill set or the equipment. And you know, in the end, one of their divers made the ultimate sacrifice. And we wanted to make sure that we honored his story and his legacy. And, you know, I think it really represents the mindset of these Thai Navy SEALs who were just unwilling to quit. And, you know, even there's a moment in the film when the British divers kind of call it off because they're like, it's not possible. But the Thai Navy SEALs stuck with it. And they were like, no, we're not going to give up. And then eventually the UK divers come back and they, you know, really, you know, join forces again with the Thai Navy SEALs to do the rescue.
Well, it's such a gripping movie. It's like an action movie in some places. I hope everyone goes out and watches it. Thank you for chatting with us today, Jimmy.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Welcome to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts panel. We are joined today by Ting and Leo Scott, producers and directors of Val on Amazon. The documentary, it chronicles the past 40 or so years of Val Kilmer's life, both as an actor and with his recent struggles with throat cancer. Can you guys talk a little bit about how you got involved in this project?
I kind of met Val randomly, pretty much a decade ago. I was editing something and I ended up going from kind of emailing him about how great he was in his performance to then ending up helping him on the project he was doing at that time, which is a Mark Twain one-man play, which he'd been developing for 10 years. And I started helping him document some of that. And I went on the road with him and kind of ended up being sort of like a friend and collaborator. And sometime around then, he asked me to help him with this mountain of tapes. So being an editor and experience with all these formats, started doing this in my garage for a long time, around my day job kind of thing, and started making some sort of story about the Twain thing, incorporating some of this incredible archive material he'd been gathering for like 40 years. But we stopped that project when he had some health issues, and Ting's and a collaborator friend of mine, she was there around that time, and when I was digitizing this material. So a few years back, she came to me, right?
Yeah, so I guess I'd seen some of this footage as it was going in, and I never really forgot about it. And a couple of years ago, probably about 2.5, 3 years ago, I just asked Leo, what's going on with all that stuff? Did you guys ever finish your film? And he said, no, but Val's doing a lot better now, and he's in remission, and he might be up for making something. So we kind of approached him with a bigger idea about making a story about his entire life and career told through his lens, essentially, in addition to shooting some stuff of him and where he is now.
So all of this thousands and thousands of hours of footage, it was just kind of stored away in boxes in his garage or something until you guys came along and said, hey, let's make a movie.
Well, he was having it stored properly, you know, but it was like a source of like stress in a way, having some of these materials, some of these formats were probably decaying, becoming obsolete. The film was being stored, you know, in the right sort of cool enough that was probably the safest thing in a way. But some of these formats were so old, and he really wanted, you know, like, it was just, he'd been gathering these things since he was a child. You know, he and his brothers were making movies when they were kids, and there was even old film reels back then that hadn't even been seen or transferred, you know. So you know, it started as a task. Oh, I'll help you do this, because we were friends and we were doing this Twain thing, having a lot of fun together. And then it became like this incredible, this is insane that he's been filming for thousands and thousands of hours, not just the fact he had the foresight to do it when no one else had video cameras, you know, and he was in New York as a young sort of actor, stage actor. He was also had the most incredible arc and interesting life, you know, going back to stage later, but starting on stage and having this big movie career, and just a fascinating man in every respect. So it sort of felt like we wanted to tell this story, you know.
It was a story about a storyteller in a lot of ways. And as filmmakers, it was just kind of rife with all those layers of somebody who's been making films, but also been trying to tell meaningful stories their entire lives. And just sort of the layers between that and his arc as a human being and his own story was just fascinating to us.
One of the most rewarding aspects of the project is Val's son, Jack Kilmer, does the narration. His father still has trouble speaking. So was it easy for Jack to sign on to the project, or was he a little hesitant? What was his mindset?
He's open to doing things all the time. Like, you know, I've known Jack a long time, and other projects we've worked on. So, you know, he was up for doing some tests very early on. We wanted to see if these scenes worked. So we got him in the studio with some early primitive scenes and said, you know, can you read? And he carried on the whole time. But, you know, maybe at the beginning he didn't know this was ever going to be a film, because, you know, there's obviously been just because we're setting out to make a film doesn't mean that we're actually going to
succeed.
Yeah. In packaging, you know, like finishing that. And I think, you know, he's a really curious person, and he's a creative person, and he was a great partner, like, to have along, because he really did add something special. We thought, like, because
I think even we were stunned in some of those early readings of his, once we put his voice against picture, how much you kind of just forgot it was him, and it just felt like Val talking to you. So we're extremely lucky that he was completely on board, and also just a very talented human being himself, and brought a lot to it.
And he also developed that voice. Like, it changed. If you listen to the earlier recordings and then the ones we did at the very end, you know, because the script was constantly changing, you know, like we're on version 35 or whatever it was by the end. So, like, we had to get him, you know, he helped us. He did this many, many times, but he really, I don't know, he
really found a voice for his father by the end that felt very, very true.
Right.
I remember when the trailer was released months ago, and I was watching the trailer and I thought it was Val Kilmer's voice until the end when you realize, he's having trouble with his voice. And so I just thought that was probably my favorite part of the film, how it was his son, and he has kind of a similar tone and intonation as his father does. Hollywood film buffs are just going to love seeing all of the behind the scenes footage of Batman and Top Gun and the Island of Dr. Moreau. There's some drama that happens behind the scenes. Was there any footage you couldn't include, or you decided not to for whatever reason?
No, not really. I mean, we get asked that question a lot, but really nothing was off the table, and Val was really open to us just going through everything and just cutting together whatever stuck for us. And we really just tried to stick to, there was so much wonderful stuff there, but in the end, we were trying to be very diligent about the things that really shaped him as an actor, and also satisfy some of the, everyone's favorite movies of him, because we all have like our favorite movie. He's such a part of my movie nostalgia. But also, so it came down to the things that really changed and shaped him as an actor, and the moments in his personal life that really shaped him as a human being.
And what kind of outlook does Val have in terms of acting again one day in the future? Do you think he's going to be able to? Does he want to?
I mean, he's always got things going on. Like, the more you get to know about Val and go through his warehouse of things and his house, like, he's just always, before he was a known actor, he's always been such a creative, prolific artist, so it manifests itself in different ways, so I'm not sure what his latest thing is, though I'm meant to be catching up with him soon, but he's been in a few films since
I think he shot 3 films while we were making our film.
Right.
So he's been in a bunch of stuff, and he's always, has new projects coming up.
Well, guys, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure, and I hope everyone goes out and watches it today. And we'll see you in just a few minutes for the group panel discussion. Welcome everyone to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts group panel. We are joined today by Rachel Fleit for introducing Selma Blair, Andrea Fine and Sean Fine for LFG, Robert Greene for Procession, Jimmy Chin for The Rescue, and Ting Pu and Leo Scott for Val. Thank you all for being here. I would love to know, starting with Rachel, what is the most rewarding aspect about documentary filmmaking? Why do you do this as your profession?
That's such a good question. I think for me, it's the way that you are able to see a person, to see yourself in that person. I'm totally a verite documentary filmmaker in that I like to see like the beauty and the mundanity of life, like the beauty in the mundanity, and just, I see myself in my characters, my subjects. I think that in making Selma's documentary, I watched her embrace herself. I watched it unfold, go through something so scary. And it was like, she gave me permission to embrace myself. And then the most amazing thing in the end is hearing from all of these people around the world who are watching the film and seeing themselves in Selma and having their own experience of saying like, me too, I feel that way. I identify, I feel seen, and she's given me permission to embrace myself too. So I don't know, just exploring like the messiness and the beauty of being a human. It's kind of hard to be alive. I think documentaries help you embrace that.
Mm-hmm. Andrea and Sean?
I think for me, it's sort of twofold. And the first is, I just am relentlessly curious about people. I never get tired of feeling like it's an honor to have someone sit in front of you and you've maybe met for very little amount of time and just share some like the most intense periods of their life with you. I think that's a gift that we never take for granted, that you're holding, you know, and you choose with honor what you do with it. It's like a promise you make to them to go with that with honor. And I think it just, you're watching people go through the journey of life and you're learning, you know, you're learning about they're walking on the path in front of you and you're going to learn from that behind it. And then I think the flip side, because that's all about me, the flip side is the other side is like, what about what you can change perspective on for somebody else? That you're opening somebody up to like walking in the shoes of somebody else and doing it with beauty and doing it with art and doing it with like heart, you know, make them care about something that they may not even totally think that they are a part of, but somehow they're connected to at the end. I think that is really moving and I never tire of that. So I think that that's why, because I think we all know that most of what we do is really hard and you have those peak moments that make it worth it. But most of it's like problem solving and the slog and all that kind of stuff that's hard. But the rest of it's really rewarding, I think, when you get to the end. It's like childbirth, you forget the.
Yeah, I mean, we're married, so obviously Andrea just said everything that I feel 100%.
Boom.
And we're,
No.
yeah, directing partners. So, like, yeah, I mean, I think that's also, I mean, it's amazing because documentaries are so big now and getting bigger, and I think it's great. And I think that it's a really hard form of filmmaking. And you could see on this panel how many different types of filmmaking and filmmaking brains are involved. You've got recreations, you've got dramatic things, you've got, you know, graphics with art, you got lots of different things to tell a documentary story now. And I think that it's just a very challenging way to make a film and to be truthful about what you're telling. And also what I love about it is trying to bring like this craft and this kind of this beauty and this emotional feel to it that movies that I saw when I was a kid or when I was younger brought me to tears or laughter or joy. Like, I think we can do that with documentaries and even more so. But I think that the skill to do that and the skill to bring in filmmaking and storytelling is something that I always look forward to every time we kind of look at a film we're doing. How are we gonna crack this nut and how are we gonna tell that story? So, so that on top of what she said.
And Robert, how about you?
I love what everybody said. I think there's a cliche about documentaries that we want to change the world with our films, but I don't know about that. You know, I don't know how I feel about that necessarily. I don't know if that's possible. I want to think it's possible. I know you know, they can have a positive effects, certainly, but I know for sure that the films that we make change the lives of the participants on screen. I know for sure that when you film people, when you tell their stories, when you spend this time together, that it has an effect. And sometimes that effect is positive and sometimes that effect is not positive. And so, you know, for me, the thing that I get most excited about with documentary is just trying to find new ways to collaborate and give agency as much as I can give agency. And collaboration goes two ways, you know. I mean, it's a little bit, I mean, this is, I don't want to say like my students, I teach documentary filmmaking at the University of Missouri. And I often say like I learn as much from my students as they learn from me. And I think that's a cliche, but it's very true. And I think with making films like this, it's a little bit similar, you know. I do believe after making these films for as long as me and my team have made these films together, that we have some capacity for how they can make positive change in people's lives, how we can learn from mistakes that we've made, learn from, you know, sort of like the limitations of this messy form of making documentaries together, right? And do something positive. And that's kind of what was the impetus of this film. I feel like I'm always asking, you know, why make a film? Why do this? Why make a film? And if I don't have a good answer for that, I won't move forward, right? But at the same time, these guys changed my life. The 6 men, these 6 survivors have been leaders for me in my life. I've grown as a human being. I've been able to look back at my own mistakes that I've made and things that I've been sort of hampered by, and frankly, like I've gone into therapy for the first time in my life, not because the film sort of induced some bad feeling for me, but the exact opposite. Because watching these guys go through what they've gone through and their ability to take their own pain and do something with it was just so eye-opening to me that now I see the possibilities of confronting my own, pain from the past, right? So that's, to me, it's just about family. It's just about faith even. I'm not a very religious person, but faith was taken from these guys by the Catholic Church, the abusers in the Catholic Church and the system that the Catholic Church enabled. And the fact that we could find faith together and belief together in making this film, that's why we made this, and that's why I still have hope for making other films in the future, certainly.
Jimmy, what about you?
I would say that, the stories that Chai and I are interested in really, they have to be really moving and inspiring. I'm often drawn to these types of stories where I'm totally inspired by the characters and the subjects. I guess China have been calling them the participants, because they're more participants than subjects. Kind of like, Robert was saying, I mean, they are part of the process, and for some reason, I've always felt compelled when I'm really moved or inspired by a story to share that story, because I've been so moved by it. It's had like a dramatic or kind of impact on me trying to be the best version of myself. But we're also accountable to these participants. We're telling their stories too. So there's this kind of two sides to it, and I also think Andrea said it as well. There's a side that's kind of for myself, and then there's this other side of sharing the stories of these participants. And in the rescue, in some ways, the divers talked to me while we were making the film, and they were saying, in some ways we made it look too easy, because from what everybody else saw, we went in and then we came out with the kids. And the story of like what they went through and, what they were willing to risk to save these kids, many of which hadn't even met them, was just amazing. And if we could all only be that heroic and that selfless and that generous, that would be amazing. And to share that, and it's like Robert said too, though, it's like, are we really, we're trying to change the world? That's pretty lofty, but if we can make the world just a little better, and have a few people who are like truly moved to act on that, idea of selflessness and generosity, that's, it's a hopeful, but it's something to aspire to. And lastly, just, I mean, I always think of us as making these films because these films are like empathy machines. Like, we're trying to create empathy. And I just think the world can always use a little more empathy.
Yeah, especially nowadays, right?
Yeah.
And Ting and Leo, what brings you to the documentary genre? Why is this so passionate for you guys?
Well, I think like a lot of the other panelists, I'm fascinated by people and just get the opportunity to get to know people who are seemingly a lot different from me, and yet discover that we're not so different. And I think that's kind of a little bit of what we're all saying, is like, there's nothing more powerful than watching a film about somebody who you seemingly have nothing in common with, but then at the end of it, just be like, oh, I am that person. So I think that's, for me, is what's powerful about documentary in particular, because these are real stories, these are real people. So it's just wonderful to be able to make films about them.
And many of the projects you all are here to talk about today are kind of ongoing stories. And how do you know as filmmakers when to end it, when to have the final scene, or should you keep waiting to see how the story unfolds? Andrea and Sean, I kind of made a joke about, a sequel to the movie, but how did you know that the ending that you chose was the ending, was the right way to end it?
It's funny, we end with the judge's decision coming unexpectedly out of left field a little earlier than everyone thought. But it's funny, we've had a couple times when people say like, well, how do you end on such a downer kind of thing? And I'm like, no, you missed the whole point, right? Like the War Dance, a film we made years ago, same thing. You have the kids come back and they go to a music competition and they come and they don't win the whole thing, right? They're the underdog kind of idea, but it's like, no, it was the journey, right? It's the journey. And so I think in some ways we were kind of handed hey dummy, here's the end, because the judge weighed in and you're not really going to find out anything else for, it could be 2 weeks, 2 years, you don't really know, and you can't live like that in the film world. So it felt natural that it sort of became the metaphor for a movement. Movements suck. It's hard. You take 2 steps forward, 1, 3 steps back, 4 steps forward. It's it's an ebb and flow. And I think these women's process relates to everybody who's trying to do anything like that. Whether it's for equal rights or against racism or equality with a capital E, it's like that. So I think the end is the journey, and it's sort of a nice point in the journey to take it, because they're vowing to fight and they're going to tell us when the story kind of continues. I don't think it will end. It's going to keep going.
And I don't think there is no perfect ending in a documentary. Life is messy. And I think the best endings are the ones you don't expect, the ones that aren't everyone won the competition or everyone. I think those are the unexpected great endings. And I think that, as I've learned throughout my career, that the more I think I'm going to film the end, or this is the scene that's going to be the end, it doesn't become the end. Like real life isn't like that. And there's always a happy surprise in a documentary. And I think that's also why I love making documentaries, because ends are like that. And that happened in LFG, and it just felt like the right place. We also I don't know, we kind of say this saying, like, you never finish a film, you abandon it, because it's like you could make a film forever if you don't stop. So you have to at some point say it's enough, so yeah.
Robert, what about you? How do you know when to end one of your works?
Well, for me, it's just like everything with I love everything that was just said, but just like everything with documentary filmmaking, it's a combination of the idea you have and what actually happens, right? And so it's always the tension between the concept and reality and everything that, all the serendipitous or awful or beautiful or all the things that were actually going to happen in the film, which is exactly, I want to echo what was just said, is exactly why I make these films, because I know the limitations of my own ideas, and documentaries are all for people who are excited by ideas, but know the limitations of those ideas as well. And so it's an exciting world to work in. But I would say for me, the last few films, there have been, well, actually going back to the beginning, most of my films, I've got 7 feature documentaries, and most of them, I've had an idea of what the ending was like, only in the sense that I knew what the goal was to get to. So there's a couple days leading up to a high school graduation, or it's a week leading up to this professional wrestling match, or we're going to get to this moment where everyone comes together, or we're going to get to the moment where we've done all these sort of processes with these just different guys for Procession. And for me, having that goal is super important. And then, you never know what actually is going to be the actual ending. So we had scripted an ending, literally scripted. I want all you guys to be back together in one space. COVID made that impossible, right? So the then the ending became about this other kind of coming together that we were able to sort of structure. And really it was like one guy going back to one final spot that he needed to get to have some real, a little bit of closure in his life. And then there's this moment, I think probably everyone who makes films can relate to this in some ways. You just kind of shoot that last thing, you look around, and everyone's shoulders are just a little bit like lower. And it just feels like, okay, like I don't really want to pick up the camera to keep going, and then, so yes, you can make a film forever, but there's also an emotional stopping place that you sort of look for. And if you're really in tune with the people you're working with, you'll find that. Having said all that, a couple of nights ago, we're in, New York, and there's a standing ovation for our movie. And that's just as much a part of the process that we were doing in the filmmaking itself. In other words, there is no ending as well, like the sort of contracts that you make with the participants in your film, the friendships you make, the collaborations that you create, they don't stop when you're done making the movie. Like I've bailed former subjects of films out of jail before. Like I had dinner the other night with a person who was in my film 7 years ago. This is just, I feel like it's really about building this thing together, and that doesn't stop. It certainly doesn't stop when the movie's still screening, and it doesn't stop many years after as well, as far as the relationships that I've built, which I'm really proud of, actually, because that gives us chance to really learn from what we did together.
And Jimmy, how about you?
The ending. Well, sometimes I feel like it presents itself, and I think a few people have mentioned that sometimes you don't know what it's going to be. You might have an idea of what it's going to be, but through the process of making the film, you kind of can hopefully discover the end. There's like the idea of like a logical ending, but I think in The Rescue, we end on this final shot of Saman and the statue kind of, celebrating his legacy and what he did. I mean, he basically made the greatest sacrifice as a volunteer to save someone. And that image is, for us, representative of like this idea that the film is really about, and it's about generosity. And then it kind of closes. But interestingly, for the end credits, Chai had these local artists from Chiang Rai do these paintings of the story of the rescue, because there's this idea of this mythology of the princess that is, is part of this mountain lore. And we wove that into the story, but Chai thought, well, this story is going to be in the future like a folkloric story. And so she had them paint what that, folkloric story would be. And so we ended it there. But it was a pretty natural ending for us here in terms of they got the kids out, and we just wanted to hit the right notes and make sure that we kind of ended with something that, pointed to the heart of the film.
And Ting and Leo, how about you guys?
Yeah, the ending, we, like Robert, we had a kind of, our sort of intended ending was affected by COVID, in that we had this whole thread through the film that we had written in the early concept about the heightened reality, with the, we were going to shoot some scenes on the river with Val as Mark Twain, which was his dream to take Twain to Hollywood, but also, to Broadway, but also we had this kind of kind of metaphorical, poetic imagery that we wanted to weave through the film. We didn't get to shoot those elements, and that was going to be the ending. And we ended up, making something that Ting's actually idea for this ending, which was like actually constructed a bit in the in the edit, I suppose. But we did replace, I suppose, ultimately the idea of twain. We shot a scene with Jack and Val, so father and son walking into the
Hollywood sunset, dressed as Batman and Robin, to sort of echo what Val did with his brothers when they were young, and just sort of that like Hollywood's fairy tale type of ending. But we also constructed, I mean, there's the actual ending of your film, and then it's like, when do you know you're at the end? Because a lot of times you can have the ending very early on. It's like, oh, that's the ending. But to know when it's actually pencils down time is a very hard thing to do, because sometimes you just have to have someone come and just like take your pencil away and be like, it's like, but usually you get to a point in your film and you're like, I'm not making this any better. I'm, like the increments of improvement start becoming fewer and fewer. And you just get that feeling when you're like, okay, like, I think it's done now. Like it's singing, maybe 2 versions ago, it was singing its best version. And you sort of revert to that. But
and even with Val, who, we were showing stuff along the way, and he's quite sort of free about the idea, like, this is a film. This is not the film. You could go and make other films with this material. You can make a film. You could go off in sort of horizontal tangents, branches off this film, and explore the life of his brother, or you could do something about Twain still. So with Val, it was kind of like he was quite free about the whole thing, and I would say I'd be fascinated to see. We chose this very first person thing with Val. We did it very deliberately, and it was in the very first concept. But I'd be very curious to see it like a third person type, where we actually have these other perspectives on Val, and maybe use some of the same material. But so the ending was, it wasn't the exact ending we set out for, but we kind of recognized it when we had it,
And Rachel, I started with you, so I will end with you. Pun intended, how do you know when the end has arrived in one of your documentaries?
I felt it. I think someone said that. I felt it the last day we filmed. I said, I'm done here. And every single time I see Selma, I think, oh, where are the cameras? We got to keep going. Because, I mean, for me, she was always going to have MS. We state very clearly on in the film that MS has no cure. And also this idea of like, then she like runs off into the sunset because she's like, her symptoms have disappeared, is actually kind of ableist. People in the world live with so much. And so I didn't want to spread that message. But yeah, it was just like, I'm done here. This story will continue to unfold, but the story I'm telling is over. And we often joke about the sequel or the prequel.
Well, thank you everyone for joining Gold Derby today. Best of luck this awards season. I hope everyone runs out and watches all of these fantastic documentaries right now.